Cult of the Self and the Self-Destructive Idolatry of American Culture with filmmaker Lauren Greenfield.
I made the film and the book because I felt like we were kind of barreling towards the apocalypse and that this was an unsustainable future. But I loved what you said about how authentic culture can provide us a way to think critically about what's around us. And that's really what my work has been about, is having a way to deconstruct the culture around us so we can kind of see the matrix that we're in and hopefully have a little agency over it.
The cult of the self dominates our culture. This cult shares within it the classic traits of psychopaths: superficial charm, grandiosity, and self-importance, a need for constant stimulation, a penchant for lying, deception, and manipulation, and the incapacity for remorse or guilt. It is the misguided belief that wealth, fame, personal style, and personal advancement, mistaken for individualism, are the same as democratic equality. It is the celebration of image over substance. Fame and wealth are their own justification, their own morality. How one gets there is irrelevant. And as we sink into an economic and political morass, as we barrel toward a crisis that will create more misery than the Great Depression, we are controlled, manipulated, and distracted by a society awash in electronic hallucinations and social media. The consumer culture and the cult of the self are not designed simply to entertain. They are designed to drain us emotionally, confuse us about our identity, make us blame ourselves for our predicament, and condition us to choose the illusions of unachievable happiness and keep us from fighting back. Unfettered, unregulated capitalism does what it's designed to do, which is commodify everything. Even human beings become commodities that you exploit for profit until exhaustion. And condition us to choose the illusions of unachievable happiness and keep us from fighting back. I'm interviewed in the film, and I think one of the things I say in the film is that this is what happens with all dying cultures, that this is really about the cult of death. And when I went to divinity school, we were taught that idols, the idol worship, begins with the consumption or the sacrifice of others, but always ends by your own sacrifice on the altar of idols. That's the danger of idolatry. And I think that's what this film very powerfully illustrates, is that a culture that kneels before these idols slays itself.
Yeah, and I also loved your words about the antidote to this apocalypse, because I made the film and the book because I felt like we were kind of barreling towards the apocalypse and that this was an unsustainable future. But I loved what you said about how authentic culture can provide us a way to think critically about what's around us. And that's really what my work has been about, is having a way to deconstruct the culture around us so we can kind of see the matrix that we're in and hopefully have a little agency over it.
Boston-born Lauren Greenfield has been exploring culture through photography and documentaries for more than 30 years. She also directed the HBO documentary Thin, which follows 4 women with eating disorders working toward recovery, Beauty Culture, a critical examination of beauty and pop culture, and The Queen of Versailles, about the owners of one of the largest and most expensive homes in the country till the crash of '08. In her latest film, Generation Wealth, Greenfield presents a visual history of our growing obsession with money, beauty, sex, and more, which Variety calls a compelling argument for a society on the brink of decline.
In a way, I started out thinking it was about money, or thinking about it was a wealth or the image of that, and what I ended up seeing is you could also plug in the currency of beauty, the currency of youth, the currency of sexuality, the currency of fame, that we were addicted to all of these things that were unattainable, and kind of comparing ourselves against ideas that were unattainable, and that just kept us on this hamster wheel of addiction.
And I think you capture it, a kind of, right below the surface, a kind of collective misery.
Yeah, it's almost like all of the subjects in the film are searching for something that can't fill a kind of emptiness that comes from trauma we kind of learn in the film. And so they're all kind of trying to get somewhere that they never get to.
In the intro, we played the sound from that guy who said, societies amass greatest wealth at the moment they face death. Are you, look at the smile on your face, are you predicting the collapse of our culture, or are you just issuing a warning?
It's kind of a warning, because I do think collapse is possible. I mean, I do think we're headed on an unsustainable path, that what you see in the film is that we want more and more, that we're never satisfied, that we can't stop until we crash. And I think that's a dangerous path to be on.
I would have money as big as this worm, in case it...
33 pounds of gold and diamonds given to me by superstars of the world.
I love money. Come to me.
I've been a photographer for 25 years, with my lens focused on wealth. I noticed that no matter how much people had, they still want more. I want to figure out why our obsession with wealth has grown. It seemed to be a shift in the American dream.
I know the names of the Kardashians better than I know the names of my neighbors.
This fictitious lifestyle fuels this sense of inadequacy.
I have the classic Birkin in almost every color.
The bags start 20,000, go up.
I realized wealth was much more than money. It was whatever gave us value. Fame, sex, even plastic surgery for dogs.
It's kind of like the end of Rome. Societies accrue their greatest wealth at the moment that they face death.
If you look great and you have a nice car, I'm all for it. But at the expense of what?
You sell your soul to the devil.
The world's first gender-neutral clothing store has officially opened in New York City.
And it's one of the first gender-neutral clothing stores in the world. And it's breaking barriers, one piece of clothing at a time.
Everything we're doing is breaking a barrier. We're looking at everything and turning it upside down and saying, why is this? Just because it's been this way doesn't mean it should continue to be this way.
Breaking the binary. That's the motto that this New York store goes by.
We do our very best to ask everybody what their pronoun is. So is it he, him, she, her, ze, zed, they, them? And from there, that makes people feel really comfortable in their shopping experience and knowing that there's going to be no judgment.
Now, Rob hopes to open up several more Fluid stores around the world, and he hopes to accomplish this within the next 5 years.
Our desire to consume has consumed us, and in a way, that's why we kind of find ourselves dancing on the deck of the Titanic and not really having a moral compass. Our identity now is so tied to what we have that we really need to find ourselves and an identity that's away from what we have before we can be happy with ourselves. Through my photography, 25 years of kind of looking at the culture, I realized at a certain point that it was evidence of the sea change in American life, and that's something we've exported around the world. Generation Wealth is a look at how the American dream has changed and really how we've all changed with it. That we've kind of gone from values of hard work and frugality and discretion, the values of my parents' generation, to a culture that just prizes bling and celebrity and narcissism. The reason it matters is because it really leads to a kind of cycle of addiction and dissatisfaction. And you see with kids today, when you ask them what they want to be when they grow up, the most common reply is rich and famous. And there's a therapist in the film who told me that that leads to depression and anxiety. We used to compare ourselves to our neighbors, keeping up with the Joneses down the road. But now we compare ourselves to the people we actually often feel like we know better, which are the people we know from TV. In the film, my own son says he feels like he knows the Kardashians better than his own neighbors, and that's what's happened, and the research shows that the more we see those images of luxury and affluence, which have become much more dominant in the media, the more we think that's normal and the more we want those things.
Center for Disease Control that reveals that deaths in America due to alcohol, drugs, and suicide is even higher than ever. The numbers have continued to go up each and every year, but the biggest jump was in opioid deaths, which have increased by a whopping tenfold in just the past 5 years. Some of the biggest increases were seen in the South and in the Rust Belt states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin. Pulitzer Prize-winning author Chris Hedges addresses this problem in his book, The Farewell Tour. I ask him why this is happening.
It's because these people feel trapped. They feel their lives are stagnant. They recognize that there's no way that they can actualize themselves, both in terms of meaningful work and economically. They recognize that there's no way out for their children. And so they are attempting to anesthetize themselves. And this despair, this desperation, what the sociologist Emile Durkheim called anomie, by engaging in self-destructive forms of behavior, whether that is through alcoholism, the opioid crisis, hate groups. I mean, it's important. Durkheim, when he writes his book on suicide, about what it is that drives individuals and communities to carry out acts of self-destruction, says that those who engage in extremist forms of hate are really driven by a desire for self-annihilation. And I think until we address this social inequality, this social dislocation that has shunted aside at this point well over half of the American working poor, you will see these kind of pathologies become more and more pronounced. They are responding to the fact that they have, at least in their eyes, been discarded as human refuse. And I think they're not wrong. We have created an oligarchic system. Income inequality is now at the highest levels in American history. And, there is a breaking point. Remember, as Barbara Ehrenreich says in Nickel and Dime, being poor, part of the working poor in America, is one long emergency. Because when your old car that you can't afford to get fixed breaks down, you can't get to work, then you lose your job, then you can't pay your rent. And finally, it's understandable that you engage in some kind of activity to blunt the pain. And that's what we're seeing. And it's getting worse. It's not getting better. Kind of constant throughout the film is that no one ever has enough. No matter what they achieve. It reminds me of Proust. I don't know if you've read Proust, but you never achieve happiness because as soon as you have what you think is happy, there's always something glittering out there. And in fact perpetuates a deep unhappiness. I think that's something you hit several times.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the core of what the movie's about, and also kind of the core of capitalism, which sows this insecurity in all of us and then can sell us something to fix that, only to find a new problem. I mean, in the film, one of the things that really struck me was talking to a Wall Street banker who said, everybody in finance has a number. And they say when they get to that number, they're out of the business. And they get to that number, and it's not enough, and they change the number. And that really resonated for me. I had done a movie about eating disorders. And girls with eating disorders, also, a lot of them told me they want to hit a number, and then they get there, and it's not enough. So you see that it's really irrational pathology and has nothing to do with the money or the weight or the youth that they're actually trying to get to. And that really was brought home when I made The Queen of Versailles, and here was this family that lived in a 20...
Just explain the house they're building.
Yeah. So The Queen of Versailles was about the family building the biggest house in America, but they were already living in a 26,000 square foot starter mansion and wanted to build a 90,000 square foot house. So of course it's irrational, but I think when you see the film, you realize that it's connected to all of us who want the extra bathroom or the upgrade on our kitchen and think that that's gonna bring us some happiness, which we get there, and it doesn't.